Well, friends, the peace of Christ indeed be with you all. Good morning. Grace and peace I bring you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Today I bring you special greetings on behalf of my co-moderator, sister, and friend in resurrection impossibilities, the Reverend Siobhan Starling Lewis, on behalf of the commissioners and advisory delegates who faithfully served during our creative 225th General Assembly that took place last June. I guess we were in Kentucky, right? I'm not sure where I am these days. So, but what an extraordinary opportunity to be part of that community who, as you know, convened to consider the issues that are on the hearts of Christians expressed in our denomination across our nation. It is a time that's particularly pivotal in the life of the church. I also bring you greetings on behalf of one of your sister presbyteries, the Presbyterian Philadelphia. Shout out, where are you? Really? I've never known them to be shy before. Oh, it's still early. Well, that's what Forrest did. Anyway, who represents 114 worshiping communities and churches that really span way beyond the city of Philadelphia. We encompass inner city, center city, suburbia, as well as rural regions. Sometimes we forget that the Presbyterian Philadelphia is really a complex entity. So on their behalf, where I've had the privilege of serving for 10 years this February, I bring you a special word of greeting and affection. It's good to be here with you at this gathering as the Synod of the Trinity, a synod that, as I was thinking about this, has been my home for 2/3 of my ministry. The other third was the Synod of Southern California and Hawaii, where I also had the privilege of overlapping briefly in that synod with Forrest. I'm grateful for the invitation to be with you here. So I'm grateful for the leadership of Bernice and Brian and Forrest and Michael and all the Synod staff who have so faithfully made sure that I know what I'm doing here this morning. Today's scripture reading comes from the New Testament, Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3, 20-21. For my colleagues who were at the Polity Conference, some of this will sound very familiar. Just naming it up front. But I will say this, it is a text that surprised me because it has framed a part of my spirit. It's a great text for people who claim to be a people of the impossible. Listen for the word of God. Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more. Hear those words. Than all we can ask or imagine. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Pray with me. Gracious God of abundance, silence in us the distractions we bring with us into this sacred space. Still our spirits. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and redeemer. Amen. Accept no limits. Just do it. That well-known Nike marketing phrase was echoing in my head as I challenged myself to climb the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia just literally 1 month ago. fully outfitted in jumpsuit, attached by a cable to 52,000 tons of the world's largest steel bridge. I stood above the harbor with this extraordinary 360-degree panoramic view, making me feel, as the song says, I'm on the top of the world, looking down on creation. And although this moment was different from the realities I had just encountered, I'd been on the road for 20 days. The view offered me a unique vantage point to reflect on what had been a historic trip for the Presbyterian Church as we ventured out with a moderator into the South Pacific, or the Pacifica, as now I'd like to call it, because that's what they call it, a place where we have had little to no formal relationships. Watching the sunset, I considered the conversations held with church leaders in these island nations that I was privileged to visit. I considered the limitations imposed on those siblings by combinations of both human sin, evil, and then climate change and the rising sea levels, causing conversations and reluctant plans for relocation and migration. A tapestry of what would be a Pacifica diaspora, woven together with the pain of loss of place and what loss of place has on one's identity. After a very quick stop in Hawaii, where I learned, when we think of Hawaii, we think, oh, cool, Waikiki, where I learned that those siblings there are struggling with similar issues that I would hear from the island nations that were not part of our country. And I won't get into that, but what a privilege to visit with Presbyterian pastors, chaplains, as well as siblings from the United Church of Christ. There we heard of the continued impact. And then we moved to the Marshall Islands. Do you know the Marshall Islands is one of the least visited places on the globe? So there we were, where we heard the continued impact of the nuclear testing that occurred in the 1950s. We visited with descendants of those people from Bikini Island, who now live on Edgett Island, or an atoll. Theirs is a story of imposed limits by governments informing them of the need to move if they wanted to have their children grow up healthy. They continue to think about the residual effects. You still can't go to a few of the islands there. This is not far away. It feels far away. To think about this, the thought of our children not being well, the thought of little Margaret not being safe, we all would move in order to ensure that. The residents then of Kiribati, one of the poorest island nations in the globe, whose rising sea level has already sent them into negotiations and conversations with Fiji, so that I might have to move in the next 2 decades. The average feet above sea level there is no higher than 26 feet. Real people live in these places. And then finally, we went to Fiji. We did not go where we would go as tourists. We went to the other island where it rains. It's really interesting, the topography. One island has sunshine and makes all this income because of tourism, whereas the other island, it rains a lot. And it did rain for the 3 days we were there. But there we had this moment to visit with this family that's been in this, like, I want to call it a family compound, the Dunn family. They've lived there for 7 generations. So they've dealt with all the nations who sold pieces of these islands to whomever. There's 60 people left now. They don't want to move. But friends, they only have 3 acres of once was 7,000 acres. One good tidal wave, what they call king tide, can do them in. But their burial ground is there. We walked through a swamp area to get to their burial ground. Their ancestors are there, and they don't want to go. Coupled with these challenges, for the challenges of economics, of poverty, of violence on women and girls, on the growing use of drugs. Think about this from your own vantage point when economic crisis occurs in our communities. It was both humbling and sobering to be allowed into this kind of sacred space, their world seemingly limited by so much, by their realities. And yet there was something else that played that was equally palpable. There was a movement of a faith tied into a reclaiming of possibilities. The church's role in education was becoming intentional and purposeful. Theirs was a theology of resurrection, while not denying the realities in their midst. So now, instead of only focusing on relocation and migration, many were turning their attention to adaptation. Could they stop the sea from finally swallowing them completely up? Could they respond to the rising sea levels by planting mangroves and building a new kind of seawall? And the church, this really impressed me. We had Pentecostal, Episcopalians, Roman Catholics, Reformed in this ecumenical chorus working together to educate their youth and members on their options and alternatives, setting aside their theological differences for the well-being of a people of which they're a part. Theirs was and is a story written from the margins and the footnotes. Hear that phrase, think about when you read, from the margins and the footnotes, a story that does not easily make its way to the pages that you and I get to read. Far is shared, a story that's been written on the margins and the footnotes that we're only now beginning to read and make part of a story of which we're woven into. So much life happens in the margins and the footnotes that we never read about. I have to say that I was very surprised by how my spirit was stirred by their pain and their courage. Their stories caused my spirit to consider a deeper understanding of my own journey as a child and descendant of yet another island people on the island of Puerto Rico, an identity framed by the diaspora of my ancestor or my ancestors. Honestly, some of you know that it's not a journey I'd like to take on because it opens up wounds and it makes me feel vulnerable. And frankly, there are days I don't want to be anyone's object lesson, especially in the church that has both blessed me richly and, if I'm honest, has irked me deeply. I'm sure, do any of you relate to that? Say amen. Amen. It's the duality of our journey as a people of faith in a system that is ours to build. I realize that notwithstanding how well adjusted I may act or look, yeah, you can laugh at that, I still live with the scars and the emotional markings of the people of diaspora, claiming my identity in the midst of the limits whispered or imposed on me by others in a dominant culture while growing up. My story is one that has also been written on the margins and footnotes, seeking to find its way onto the pages that might one day be read and helpful to others. About 15 years ago now, in an effort to make known the story of the Latino diaspora and reality in the United States, Lin-Manuel Miranda, now known by Hamilton, produced In the Heights. I've known Lin since he was about 2 years of age. And it was extraordinary to see this story of the Latino community come to life in a way that was seen and heard as a story common and connected to the stories of others, other human beings of other backgrounds. The drama takes place in this little neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, and he weaves together the aromas of coffee, the sounds of music, with the universal themes of family, hope, and home. He weaves together the stories on the margins of a people who feel powerless before a cultural reality around them. And at the center of the story, we find this elderly, wise woman, grandmother Claudia, Abuela Claudia, who, like many others, came to the States, other immigrants, to make a better life from Cuba. She worked cleaning houses, but now she's like this font of wisdom in the neighborhood as she helps to bridge the past with the possibilities of the future. Like a queen on her throne, she sits there and just embodies love and hope for all these people of different backgrounds, the emotional anchor. Working with people who feel so limited by all the challenges that are before them, not having enough to pay for the tuition of a child to go to college, not being able to move somewhere because of color of skin, the inability to afford a better life. And her spirit's defined by a recurring theme that I've always loved. I'm not going to make you do this. I might make you do it later, but nobody sigue, which for me, that means do not stop. Keep on, keep on. But it echoes the words of the Apostle Paul in Philippians, press on. So for me, nobody sigue is directly a Spanish interpretation of pressing on. Words that inspire action and hope for those in the play, as well as for us in the audience. I found myself in that play. For me, the words are reflected in my own family history. Some of you know this, that my late parents, my dad and my mom, dad with an 8th grade education, mom with 6th grade, came to the mainland from Puerto Rico. The economic situation was not good when they were 19 or 20. They came to build a life. And I'll remind you all, if you have any doubts, that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. My dad fought in the Korean War. That was, and his point of entry was Indiana. And my mom would make paper hats at a factory in New York City. 3 daughters later, at the age of 40, Dad left his job of 20 years to go study theology in Bangor, Maine. My mom left the life she knew in her family, and I frankly was about 15, and I thought they lost their minds. So my parents moved to the state of Maine, where my dad, with the first language being Spanish, studied Greek and Hebrew and English. And my mom, I love this metaphor, would work at the cafeteria, feeding the hungry soul of seminarians, right? So where the world would have contained them, there was no guarantee of finances of employment. Where the world would contain them, they have found a way to not be contained. Where the world said no because of language, accent, skin tone, whatever else we want to put up there, culture, they could hear the voice of God saying, don't stop. press on, compelling them forward. Nobody sigue. And my dad became a Presbyterian pastor serving the tri-state area, and my mom became an elder. And then they inflicted the DNA onto their offspring. Their witness just humbles me, mostly because they allowed God's voice to break into the limits of complacency and comfort of what they had heard of how they had lived. They chose a resurrection faith over the messages of the world that would limit who they were and what they could do. Do you hear that message sometimes in your life? They resisted and rejected the narrative of limits and scarcity. Church, listen. They resisted and rejected the narrative of limits and scarcity. Theirs is a story written on the margins and footnotes that have found their way into the heart of my story. Theirs is the sound of no pare, press on, that has shaped the sounds of my journey. The determination to press on, even when 10 years ago I had to deal with the vocal dysphonia, that I really wanted to shrink away. I could no longer sing. What does that do to my identity? From singing solos to now like, yeah, singing solo. Theirs is a story that has emboldened me. But here's the thing. This is my story on the margins and on the footnotes. I'm confident that there are many stories in this room that mirror some part of my journey in some way or another, that have found a way to move beyond the no to the yes of who we're called to be. Presbyterians, hear me loudly. To move beyond the no, because we love that word. Amen. To the yes of who we're called to be. I believe that there's stories like this in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in tucked away rural areas in Appalachia that feel forgotten and unseen. Stories that have not been written that the rest of us can deeply understand, as well as our urban centers, places where culture says there is no way forward, there is no hope. But I'll remind us that the light breaks into the darkness. And when that light breaks through, options are not shut down. New creation can happen. That is the kind of leadership that I really believe you and I are called to. Frankly, we've always been called to, especially before a church that is weary, anxious, and wondering about our future. We belong to a system. I love being Presbyterian, but confession is part of our journey. We belong to a system that too often responds no in the name of order. Well, order without ardor is simply legalism. And legalism, well, you could use the Bible to help you with what happens with legalism, but legalism misses the core element of our faith. That's a relentless love story. It's a relentless love that will go to the depths of hell to bring us back to our God, saying, gotcha. And love will always have the final word. As we are entrusted with leading our churches, our presbyteries, and this synod, consider the array of people we serve, I believe we must find a way of together bringing those stories, taking them from the margins and footnotes, and incorporate them into the pages of our larger narrative. We don't have to compete. We need to be able to share the depth of our journeys together. We must claim them and write them down, for in those margins and footnotes, we will find voices of those long silenced. We will find stories of the unexpected and the unassumed that inspire and encourage our hearts and witness as a people of faith to end where I began, to accomplish far more than anything you and I can imagine. Amen. To press on and to embrace the rhythmic sounds of nobody sigue, sigue, nobody sigue, sigue. And you all need to move with me now, because you have a long 2 days. So nobody sigue, sigue. Come on. Nobody sigue, sigue. Nobody sigue, sigue. A little louder here. Nobody sigue, sigue. Nobody sigue, sigue. And may God bless us each, all of us together and as individuals, as we continue to build a road that has not built before us, that has not been built before us. Bless you all. Amen. Amen. Moderating numbers, we really get into the weeds, and we're trying to do the right thing. So this isn't, bad spirit, but it is an interesting moment. All right. So I've been asked to share a little bit about what I'm seeing or what I'm reflecting on. So what I'm going to do is the first 10 minutes, just talk a little bit about, I have a PowerPoint, and then hopefully we can engage some questions together. How did I get here? People like to know, well, why did you stand for moderator? And that's a really good question, because it was not my intention to stand for moderator at this point in my life. I would have done it 10 years ago before Philadelphia. I was lining myself up. And frankly, at this point, I thought, for a lot of cultural biases and messaging, that the window had closed on that chapter. I did, however, want to be a commissioner. So let me own that, because I felt like, and maybe some of you feel this way, I didn't know what's going on. So it was like, maybe if I'm a commissioner, I'll learn something and maybe can help in some dialogue as well. So that was my motivation for standing. It was the first Monday in March that I got a phone call at 9:10 in the morning from someone whose name I cannot share because they're too known. And they said, you need to stand for moderator. I said, you really need to get behind me. I was like, are you out of your mind? At this moment in my life, I've served 12 years at Princeton, 8 on the foundation. I'm going to be a commissioner. And I love my presbytery. We're doing really funky things. I'm not tired. She goes, well, that's precisely why you need to stand, because you don't think about standing. And that threw me into a bit of an existential quandary without a lot of time, because the clock was ticking on our GA timelines. In all those timelines, we get 120, 90, 60, 45. So I said, okay, I'll pray about it. I'll talk to a few people. I talked to one of my most trusted colleagues, our state clerk, and he says, yeah, it kind of makes sense. I'm like, really? I talked to my personnel chair, who was the senior pastor at Doylestown Press, and he sent me a text, I really think you should stand. So instead, I was thinking, God, can you use someone to say, what are you thinking? Instead, it just kept doing this. So then I came to this realization that, you know what, maybe after 30 years of ministry, after being a PK, after growing up in new church development, after being married to a medium-sized church pastor, maybe I could bring something to the floor. And for the first time in my life as a Presbyterian, I was confident, win or lose, that I could bring something to the conversation of value. That was a big deal for me. It was a huge deal. I didn't care about prevailing because we don't like saying win or lose. So we say prevail. So that kind of stuck with me, and Kevin's a witness to that. You know what? I love our congregations, and if I can be a voice of hope, at least that'll be on the floor, if nothing else. I was terrified at one level, but I leaned in. But then there's a conundrum. You have to find someone to stand with, either as your co or as your vice. And because if you remember that was like the GA from purgatory, because it was stretched out for 3 weeks. Who in their right mind has 3 weeks that they can navigate not knowing when they will be called? That's what it was like. So we're looking at the list, very few people. And then I had 2 requirements. First, I wanted West Coast. I wanted male, just to do this compliment thing. And that was like, couldn't find someone, because I served the West Coast. That felt pretty to me, right? It felt like whole. People didn't know many people. And then the name of Siobhan came to me. So I looked up her preaching, and she was feisty and kind of rogue. And if anyone knows anything about me, I like being on the edge, pushing the edges so that we can move forward. I think ministry's done on the edges, not in the insulated. So I called this woman the second week of March. We had never met. We had never spoken. We had never even seen each other other than what we would do. And I said, hey, listen, we don't know each other, but I'm going to stand for moderator. I need someone to stand with. I don't even know if we have enough in common to do this together. I don't know if we would even like each other. I mean, this is real, folks. It's like, this is scary stuff. You're going to hook your wagon to someone who may or may not be spiritually aligned with how you believe you're called to lead. Talk about risky business. Anyway, so instead of saying, no, she said, yeah, I'd like to talk about it, because she was innocent. And that was my other requirement, under 40. So that was a really hard category to break that year. It's like I could count them on 2 hands. So we talked. The second conversation, she told me what her bottom line was. You need to know what's your red line in the sand if you're honest. She said, I need to know that LGBTQI people will be encouraged. I go, my son's gay, next. So I said, I'm committed to raise conversations, these really hard conversations that go beyond binary, but I will never scorch the ground, because I need people to be able to walk on that ground. So can you live with that? And she said, yeah, I can. And there it went. A week later, we on my birthday, the presbytery was going to meet March 29th. And 2 days before, I said, well, what do you think? Do we hold hands and jump? And it's been the greatest jump that I've taken blindly. It was like a bungee jump into the abyss. Even when we wrote stuff, those of you are more participating Presbyterians, you know how the Presbyterian Outlook had all those writings on us, our packet. We never had to edit each other. We met one day at my son's house where we took family pictures in Washington. We divided up the questions. And so our spirits kept aligning. So for us, that was a great gift, because then we trusted, like we could play off each other. And there's only one other person that I've trusted with the depth of that in my being, and he's here, it's Kevin. We've known each other since seminary. But give us 5 minutes in a car, we're like good, because we know how we think and we have similar values, and that matters. I'm giving him a lot of shout outs today. That's enough, Kevin. Anyway, so this is what we thought we could bring together. I'm doing my swan song at this point in my ministry. She has decades that she could continue to grow and bring into her ministry, right? We both are bound by our love of congregations. Congregations are our bread. They are our butter. They are our witness. They are where it's happening. And somehow, in my opinion, this is opinion now, we forget that. We think there is no synod without presbytery. There's no presbytery without churches. And let's not take that all the way up, right? So for me, it's like, if we can't energize with gratitude, which we don't do well, friends. We don't celebrate the good things that are happening in many of our smaller churches because we're so busy worrying about what we don't have. We'll say more about that in a bit. But we both love the local church. We love inclusion, the importance of widening our table, always mindful that even when we make room at that table, when I sit down the first time, I may not have the same understanding of that table that Michael Wilson has. And that's where we fall down a lot. We go, well, now they're at the table. Well, that table's pretty scary. You know, I'm not quite there yet. And then our commitment to leaning into tough conversation. We do it a little differently, but we are clearly committed to that. So our primary role as moderators, I don't think we have the prestige that we used to have when Dr. Valentine was moderator. He's here today, former moderator of the General Assembly. Herb, if people could see who you are, so we could say thank you to you. Herb Valentine seems to be modest. But we wanted to be ambassadors of hope coming out of the pandemic, ambassadors of possibilities at a time where a lot of grief and anxiety, married to all the other things that we'll talk about now, that I've entitled Opportunities and Challenges, Wilderness Wanderings While We're Wandering. And I'm going to say one thing. Wilderness will happen over and over and over and over again. So this isn't a one-time journey. Hopefully each time we go through a season, 2 weeks later, we won't be surprised when a new season begins, right? So I believe that some of the wilderness signs are coming at us from the outside. Again, you know this, many of you may know it better than me. Our cultural context right now is a bit uncharted, right? The pandemic threw us into this season, which accelerated some things in the church that frankly would have taken 20 years to do later. How many of you thought you would have screens in your sanctuaries or be using online services? Probably nobody, right? But now, by default, when we couldn't be in community together incarnationally, we had to figure out, what does incarnation look like during this season? And the arguments around the pandemic were extraordinary. To mask or not to mask, that was the session decision. We would get so many questions. Please tell us that we can or can't. Well, no, under our governance session, we're telling you to follow the CDC. Here is what they're recommending. But people didn't want to make decisions because why? Because it was always causing unrest. Then I say resurgence of visible racism. For a season, if we had wanted to articulate negative biases, we would have done so in our heads or with very, very close friends, because we understood somewhere that it might not be cool in the world. We lost that during George Floyd and after, right? That was a pivotal moment when the world woke up and went, oh, this is real. For many of us, that was just real already. But then all of a sudden there was this awakening. And that hasn't gotten better. It's not only race, right? I mean, we're seeing it with anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. There's this boldness of ism that defies the mind, because when we dehumanize one another, we start building, and I don't mean this to sound harsh, but when we dehumanize one another, we start building the template that's used by terrorists. That's just real. And if you and I can't resist this, I don't know who can in the world. Then, so the once assumed civility lost, right? How many of you dread being with relatives? You know, I made a conscious decision. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my two grandgirls, and I would not agree, or a family wouldn't agree. I will not risk that relationship to prove I am right, because being right is overrated. I'm not gonna risk that. We'll dance a little bit here and there, but really, do I have to create more instead of building bridges that might create curiosity and possibilities? And then the cultural unrest. I never imagined January 6th, ever. I just never dreamt. I was at the beach and I got in the car and the radio, I looked at my feed. That's what I do. I went, what? And I texted Margaret Kibbins, who's a chaplain to the U.S. Congress. She's a friend, a colleague, and she works there. I was like, I don't know if you can even answer this. Are you okay? She did answer. She was in an undisclosed location. But when did we see it? When did we imagine beyond the 60s this level of unrest? And then the next slide begins to talk about the religious decline, right? The dramatic shift in adults who identify as Christians. The nuns are growing, those who have no affiliation. And between 2007 and 2019, people who identified as Christians, according to a few polls, went from 77% to 65%. That's a big, but is it really about Christianity? Or is it about the skepticism about religious institutions? Because those people, about 70%, still identify as spiritual. Do you see an opportunity there? They identify as spiritual, but they do not identify as religious institution. We have failed several generations because of our institutionality. That has put our, in my opinion, that has put our programming, not even our theology, our way of operating as more important than maybe engaging outside our walls. I'll say more about that. So there's this large skepticism. When my son was an elder, he was a youth elder in Claremont Pres, I was really struck. He would miss Sunday worship, but he wouldn't miss session. I found that interesting, because in the session, he felt like he was contributing to a conversation that was helping the community. And church felt like it was making him get up early, and he wasn't sure he was getting much out of the way it was embodied. He loved this church. But so, you know, I'm like, okay, God, I got something going on here. Thank you. So these are some of the things from the outside, right? We could talk about all the cultural challenges that impact our families. I can tell you, I grew up with everybody on the soccer field on Sunday morning for my son, and whatever other field was available. We have to navigate that reality too. All right, next slide. So that's the outside factors. And this is pretty common. The church has always been challenged by both outside and inside forces. And the inside forces can at times be more detrimental than even the outside forces because it dilutes our ability to work together. The outside forces we expect, the inside ones. So our denominational decline, right? We lost another 51,000 members since 2020, according to our own statistics in 2023. That's not a secret. We know that we have been somewhat in decline. We're 1.1 million now with about 8,800 churches compared to 2016, where we were 9,400 churches. Again, this is data. I don't want the data to frame your heart and your brain. This is just our reality. In order to move, we have to understand our reality. But something else was happening at the same time. Worshiping communities, although they're small, have been growing. And the number of people being confirmed has been growing in the last few years. But we can't keep up with the death rate. Does that make sense? You know, we're bringing people in somewhat in some places, but we're dying off more than we are birthing new possibilities. We already know, you've heard this already, less membership impacts the budgets across all the way. And then there's this infrastructure question. We run our churches, I'm going to talk denominationally now, big level, like we were in the 1960s. We're no longer in the 1960s. The 60s left us. Now, we don't dress that way anymore. You know, we don't talk that way anymore. I could have worn flower power stuff. You would look at me as I was crazy. So why don't we look at what we have as if we're crazy? We can't keep this funding model going. Hence, Michael Wilson and Erica are helping us think, what models do we have that might be helpful? Because the current one, which is endowment per capita mission, may not be working. I don't think it's working overall. But especially as we feed the denominational, you know, that a presbytery has to pay an entity. I know we're covenant community, but again, we're not the 1970s either. You can't demand of me what I don't have. Well, you can, obviously. So I'm being rogue here. So what can we demand of each other, right? That makes us feel like we're in covenant community, because that model has been questioned, is being challenged, and it's not feeding us the way we need to be fed anyway. Hence the, what do we call it? What's our commission called, Michael? The Unification Commission has been formed. That commission with this commission were probably the two most important committees and commission that we formed. We lost a lot of sleep. We wanted the chairs of those two bodies to be people I could trust with my life, that would not just come in with cookie cutter agendas or be bought by anyone else's cookie cutter agenda, so they can lead honest conversations, so maybe we can learn something. That's why this Unification Commission is not a merger. It is not that let's bring them both together. No, it's to bring it down so we can grow it back up. That is scary. But if we don't do that, it's going to be scary because it will be done by attrition. And by attrition until we'll have no choice. And we will not have done it from a place of vision. And that is one of our sins sometimes. We keep doing the erosion instead of saying, semicolon, we got to stop. It's going to come one way or the other. So either we're going to be parties to making something new happen that's responsive, faithful to this moment, or it's going to happen to us anyway. And it won't be full of hope and vision. It'll be even more sadness. So here are three of the challenges. I have three quotes that have really shaped some of my thinking. One is Philistine. This notion that we are in a reformation every 500 years. Many of you have heard this, right? When old ideas are rejected, new ones emerge ultimately. And the old expression is refurbished and revitalized. The thing about reformations are that it's painful because we will leave behind assumptions that once formed who we are. And assumptions are not all bad, but when they become the idols that get in our way, we have to truly examine who we are as leaders, right? This is hard work, but it's the work before us. So I do agree that every 500 years is a reformation of sorts. Our opportunity is 70% of those people are spiritual. Is there anything we could reform about how we do church that would speak to them? I have a few ideas, but we'll talk about them later. The second challenge, decent and order people. We cannot program ourselves out of this. We can't. That old paradigm that, well, let's do this program. Let's create the 7 best steps of Gibler's PowerPoint moment, like his communication. We can't do that right now. I don't think we can. And this is really, Susan Beaumont said it well, we're in a liminal season. I would say we're always in a liminal season between the here and the not yet. That is our job. We're never there. We're there after we die, perhaps, but we're not there while we're living. So liminal seasons cannot be powered through. They must be attended to. And we need to be comfortable with unknowing and wonder. That is a hard task for Presbyterians. To lean in with no absolutes, no G.42 that tells you absolutely how to respond. It means you have to be open because we don't know what we don't know. I happen to like living in that space because it lets me dream. And I have theories about why I'm more comfortable in that space than some others. But it doesn't have to be a bad space. But it is a space with little answers, not decision-making. It's a season of experiment. What's the worst that'll happen? We try something, it didn't work. Next year, we pivot. But if we don't try anything, we don't ever know what we can or can't do. We won't even let God affirm what we might do. So that's this piece. I really encourage you to think about that. And then the last one, Richard Rohr, which is leading between the here and the not yet. Again, a continuation of this liminal space. And it's that space where you know what you're doing isn't working, but you're not sure what to replace it with. But none of us know what to replace it with. Because even if what I do in Philadelphia, what Brenton and Kevin and I do with our leadership team and our elders and ministers of word and sacrament, it might work for us. Doesn't mean it's going to work in Lackawanna. So you can't apply a cookie cutter movement of our activity. I think what we can apply is values, right? What is the driving value that helps us set ourselves up to do something different? Like the medical debt. I mean, that's a pretty outside the box, crazy idea. That's responding to leveraging some of the poverty, right? Responding directly. The other thing is you can't do it all. And that's got to stop, because and what happens when we're doing it all? We get overwhelmed and we do what? Nothing. So pick one thing, do it for 2 years, lean in, boldly invest people, time, talent, treasure. But know that it's okay to not do it all. You can't respond to every crisis, but respond well to the things you choose to believe God's leading you into. So here are corporate temptations. And these are biblical. Exodus 32. What happens when we're in this place of stress? We're afraid, we're caught in the wilderness. We want to build new gods. So we replace the 7 best steps of communication that Michael Givler wrote with the 6 best steps that Forrest Clausen wrote, right? We try to replace one with the other, hoping that something will stick. So we have to watch ourselves, and we're not just creating another paradigm that's absolute instead of one that's fluid, that invites us to be creative. You know what happens? You know, that golden calf thing, they wanted to carry God around. It doesn't work that way. God gets to carry us around. And then the other thing that I'm sure you're all facing, hopefully not participating in, is romanticizing the good old days, right? Oh, when I was in Egypt, I had onions and leeks that I loved to eat. And now I'm starving out in the wilderness. Really? Our people make romance. What is it when we retell the story differently? We rewrite history and we romanticize what was probably never romantic. You imagine living through World War II? Oh, sounds like great romantic fun. You know, the Civil War, every era has been challenged. I believe every era has been hard. This happens to be our hard. So we can't compare our hard with everyone else's hard. We need to lean into this moment and not make believe that those who went before us, well, but think about it, they had 1,000 people in the churches, and now we have 20. That may be true, but the circumstances of that 1,000 people were very, very different for them. And now we are where we are. And then my favorite one, which we all have participated in, these leaders have to go. The blame game, you know? I mean, so for me, what I've learned about the blame game is, and it takes our energy away from what we should be doing, because then it deflects. And when we deflect, we do nothing because we're blaming. It's all Forrest's fault. I blame Kevin every day. And Brenton, poor Brenton, he's the new kid on the block, right? But when we blame others, it's interesting because in the Presbyterian, we say no one gets to blame anyone else. The buck stops with me. No one can blame an administrative staff person. I don't want to know about it. That doesn't help us. Let's resolve the issue. Then we'll talk about what went wrong afterwards. But you want to spend your time blaming each other, blaming your pastor. And if nothing else, this season of pandemic, at least in our presbytery, brought out some interesting dynamics. Several pastors, I want to say 4 or 5, actually found themselves seeking other forms of employment because who they were always have been faithful, good, solid people were not responding to the anxiety and the newness that the church as it came out of pandemic wanted. No one's gonna meet the bill. But at that moment, people want more authenticity. A talking head isn't good enough. I mean, we're talking about really good people. I'm not talking about people that I would write a letter of transfer for. I'm talking about really thoughtful leaders. But the anxiety of the system because of the culture is such. And they were tired too. So you're tired, the church is tired, church is anxious, and I believe this is happening in other places as well. So these leaders have to go, and you hear yourself blaming someone, just put a semicolon. You don't need to put an exclamation point, just stop yourself and ask yourself, what is your role in this system? Why are you always disappointed with the behavior of others? What is it? Or as you're leading others who do this, right? Because more likely than not, you're leading people who do this, make them pause. Help them break the script. We all have scripts, and some of our members have great scripts. Doesn't matter who the pastor is. You can change the faces and the names. The pattern persists. And I have several churches I could say that about. So, and I love my churches, but you can't, you have to be realistic about the climate we're in. So here's the truth about the wilderness. We don't go into these seasons to die. That's a myth. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, we don't know where we're going because God and the cloud and the pillar of fire doesn't move out of our way. But we don't go to die. We go there with the opportunity to rethink, to create the space, to reclaim a new identity. That is what I love about the wilderness. It gives us permission to fine tune, to be iron sharpening iron about our call today. Doesn't mean we were wrong before, but it's where we are today. So it gives us that opportunity. And out of that wilderness, right, what happened to the people in 40 years? It took them 40 years. The generation who was there that was over 20 had to die before they went into the promised land. What does that tell us? Now, I don't think I'm advocating for death here, but it's a spiritual thing, right? Are we open to leaving behind things that once looked like sacred cows? Are we still arguing about the color of the rug or what light we're going to put in the sanctuary, as opposed to what are we doing outside our doors? What does our budget say about who we are? Is our budget only about sustaining and paying for the rent and the building, the mortgage? And if so, is this an opportunity to rethink that? I know place is sacred for us. We love going back to places that our families played in, where we have good memories. Princeton decided we had to sell the campus where my son was born. And I used to love just going by there because I remember everybody waiting for us when we got back from the hospital. Just conjures up. And I was sad, but it was the right thing to do, given how the city was acting out and we couldn't do what we were hoping to do. We have to be bold enough to cry and move on with new possibilities. But I do believe that we're called in wilderness to come out stronger, better, with a new sense of grace for one another. So I do believe that. So here are some of our leadership options. Do the next slide. No, keep going. Okay, there. Okay, so a popular one is do nothing and hope that it goes away. How many of you recognize that one? You know, I mean, it's like, right. So what we have to tell the people we serve, that doing nothing is in fact a decision. I will tell you that when I got to Philadelphia, I was told that I was gonna, one of my first acts as exec was gonna be to close First African. Oh, I said, oh, no one's using the brown girl to close the black church down. That was my gut response. And then I met with the leaders of First African with Kevin, and Kevin knows they were small but mighty. They were present in the community. They inspired my soul. So we invested like 150,000 to bring seminarians to get new leadership in the room, even if it was temporary, just to create other models of being. And then, as God's grace would have it, we started working with that church and another church. For 2 years, Kevin and I met, and Pastor Janelle Dixon, every month of those 2 sessions. This doesn't come easy. And then there was a fire of a third church, tiny church, 8 members, 4 of them were all related to each other. But we didn't want them to lose their agency over the $5.5 million they got from the fire. But there was no way they were going to rebuild for 8 people. But we let them sit for a year. And then they wanted to join this conversation. And today, I think it's 6 years later, Kevin, we have the most extraordinary pastor. We took $2 million of those dollars and put it in a salary package, so they would always have at least 80 to 100, so they wouldn't have to hire minimal, barely paying packaging, knowing that the church would always be able, the 3 communities together would always be able to raise $40,000-$50,000. And that church is New River. We didn't force the space until they told us what they wanted to do. And now that community is right on the forefront of a region that is on the forefront of gentrification. And I believe it will be a force to be reckoned with. They already are, but their spirit that was already there is even more emboldened by the leadership and by the commitment. But people did not see that, and we did not know what it was going to look like. Please hear us. We were taking it one step at a time, believing that God was prompting something here. People can try to stop the Reformation hanging out, recite the 7 deadly words. We never did it that way before. You know that song. We've all sung it, and our people sing it a lot. I'd say this one really bothers me: hiding assumption, self-righteousness, and cynicism. We are very intelligent, so our cynicism is top-notch. It is extraordinary. We are so sophisticated. We can try to canoe the mountains, which you can't do, instead of using the navigational tools. Next slide. Or we can affirm what we say we believe. And God's plans for us are far bigger than what you and I can see. It's a hard thing to believe. But we say that we're a people of resurrection hope in a really, really, what feels like a dark season. But there's always light breaking through. Embrace the season of unmapped opportunities. We will fail. That's okay. And then this one is what really drives me. Lean into what we have. We will never be the church down the street, but we do have things. Some of our smaller churches are really good at hospitality. So can they use that to serve the community? Can they do that to generate enough income to keep going with a presence in a community? The theology of scarcity has really tainted the landscape, especially of the mainline Christians. We believe it. We talk about decline all the time. I'd like to talk about opportunity some of the time. And then for me is enjoy the journey, right? So for me, as we walk through this season, I hope that you can dream dreams. Hear the words of Joel as we enter seasons like Lent. Dream dreams. Don't be afraid to dream. If we don't dream, we don't move. Collaborate. You don't have to do this alone. So one of the things that we're encouraging a lot is churches partnering. We're venturing into sharing a pastor with 2 communities, and you know what the hardest thing about that is? Worship time. Whew. Want to talk about the sacred cow? And it has nothing to do with the sacred nature of worship. It's about who wants to get out in time for lunch, to be with their family. Let's be real here. So we've got 2 churches that have just kind of signed a memo of understanding. We're working with the Board of Pensions, but we're hoping that by hiring a full-time pastor, we will hire someone who will generate possibilities and not someone who's just kind of like, well, I'll work here 15 hours and then I'm going to go to my real job where I get pension or whatever. And then this thing about the margins and the footnotes, share your story. We don't share our stories particularly well, even in our own regions. Share a story of hope, which is where I want you all to go to right now, since I've spoken enough. For the next 10 minutes or so, if you can share one story of hope, taking no more than 2 minutes, given how many people are at the table, and share that with one another. Something is stirring in this space, right? At this particular moment. There's something about creativity and movement that I feel is being experienced here right now as a synod. And this synod is really challenged because it's our demographics like day and night in some of the places. But I could feel the something stirring of encouragement here. So what is it? Can you share in 2 minutes something that's on the margins and in your footnotes that you wish more people would know about, that would inspire them and encourage them? It does not need to be big. It just needs to be faithful. So if you all can do until 2:35, 11 minutes, do that, and we'll come back and share, and then we'll wrap it up.
Before you get real comfortable, folks, will each of your tables, I would love for each of your tables to have a scribe with a name to go along with the good story, so that we can collect all those and Mike Givler can go through them and then harass you for good stuff on the Synod website.
See, this is called collaboration.
You have the new communication.
Okay, friends, I'm going to call you back. Only because the time is what it is. And I'm going to do something that normally we would not do. All right, Presbyterians, can I call your attention, please? Thank you. I'm going to do the clap in a second. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. All right, thank you. I'm mindful of the time and I want to get us to this point of stretching and being. I am not going to ask you all for your feedback. I hope that you were able to share some of the stories with one another, because I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask whatever it is you want to ask of me. Because I won't be moderator after June 2024. So anyway, is there anything you're wondering about, thinking about? If I can answer, I will answer. Come on, Ellie.
Particularly with my voice. I'm wondering how we can instill hope in our presbyteries. Many of our presbyteries have not had a candidate under care for a while. And some presbyteries still have candidates under care, but have gone to a mode of only looking at education for commission ruling elders. How can we instill a spirit to keep our eyes open and tap people we have who have gifts for ministry, who will be the ministers of word and sacrament alongside the teaching elders of the future?
So what I would answer that without having a magic formula is that's the responsibility of all of us in the local church. We have to stop the narrative that there are no jobs. There will be no jobs if we keep saying there are no jobs. We've got to stop this. And I have to tell you, the seminarians that we have met, and now I'm going to say we, because we have a program with Princeton, they're extraordinary. Even those who never work with small churches. People say yes. God keeps calling and people keep saying yes. So you in the local church need to believe that. And if you see gifts going, you need to tap the shoulder and say, you know, you have great gifts. Maybe you'll be called to go to seminary. Plant seeds. I spent 2 weeks with high schoolers and rising college students in July. I was blown away. But if we don't affirm, so even my benediction, I brought everyone who was liturgists. They've never done that before. Oh, come on, you're part of my benediction. They were tickled to death that they were part of that big embrace of sending out. We have to stop thinking of our young people as a program and start thinking of them as already an integrated, important part of our present future. Ellie, that's all I got. Let God take care of that. Anything else? That's an important question about our present future.
Thank you, Ruth. Earlier, you made the statement about changes that have taken place in our congregations who we never would have thought of having screens at one point, and they're everywhere now. I have a sense that there is congregations that operate as islands. And here's what I mean by that, that there is less than a perfect sense of the connectivity within the Presbyterian Church, much less the church overall. My question is there a way to capitalize on this technology that has been put in place and possibly even go so far as to create worship services that connect the church all across the state, the Synod, the Presbytery, the United States? And would it be beneficial? It's a thought.
I agree.
I'm dreaming.
Well, a dream.
I'm Joel and I'm dreaming there.
You don't dream dreams. So what I would say is maybe get a grant for a kind of worshiping community grant that would be technologically framed with you and a few friends who agree to start something, and just do it. You know, we can't legislate this, right? We have to see if it takes place. You have this intuitive sense that we could use this moment to broaden it in a different way, which I think is more of a 1001 worshiping community modality. Those funds are easy to get for the first round. Partner with your presbytery synod, grab a few friends and see if it takes, because there is some opportunity there, right? It will never replace some parts of our life, but it could enhance and create another dynamic. So go for it. You got a little time. Any other question about seminary, about churches? Yes.
Ruth, so one of my rants lately has been about cynicism. What are some of the strong? Thanks. So one of my rants lately has been about cynicism. You mentioned it in your presentation. I'm curious to hear, what are some of those voices of cynicism that you've heard most strongly in your travels?
Yeah, it's like my kryptonite. It makes me crazy. What I see is, so I'm just going to name a couple places. People who have faithfully served the church for decades. As the church is changing, reforming, in their grief, in their sadness, instead of claiming it as such, they're very judgy about anything else that's being formed. And it's all over social media. And it's like, can we be kind to one another? There is nothing right now. A General Assembly gathering will not look like the ones that I cherish in my heart, right? However, I never dreamt that I would be moderating 600 people online. Would I propose that as a model? Am I glad we did it well? But would I want to do it again? Not particularly, right? But it was an attempt. Now the reverse is going to happen. I happen to think that could be better, because at least there'll be people in a room. You see, all of you, you fuel each other. Right? So if we hope to be a church in the future, my opinion now, we need to be in the room together. At the Synod, at Presbyterian, we need to take advantage of our technology in all kinds of ways that we never dreamt. But this is my simplistic view. The biblical narrative is clear. God kept using virtual presences throughout the Old Testament. And, it did well. But it didn't take fully. And then guess what? Incarnation. So we need to do this dance with both, right? But it's the meanness and the judginess that gets put on social media by those of us in leadership. And it's not we all have a right to our opinion, but do we have to take each other out on our opinion? And that breaks my heart, because the truth is, I love some of the people who are doing it. And these are people that I've respected for decades. But we need to call it what it is. We're all grieving in some way. When we grieve because we're losing what we cherish, what grew us, what shaped us. So that's what I've seen with cynicism. And it gets veiled under I care about our church. Well, yeah, thank you. Laughter, because we have them in all our congregations. In the name of what I care for, I'm taking you out, Bernice. So it's that tension. It's not the opinion. It's the modality. And we're not doing much better in our disagreements and what we critique in the world. I'm sorry to say. We need to do better because we can.
Hi, Ruth. I've enjoyed everything you've said today, and I appreciate it. And I think I've asked this every time I've met someone sort of associated with GA or Louisville or, one of the things I've come across in the churches that I've served or worked with is just this sense of, well, why does it really matter that we're Presbyterian? Why do we have that building in Louisville? And why should we send our per capita? You know where this is going, right? I am very committed to the connectional church. I have received its benefits and have engaged. Obviously, if I'm sitting in this room, I've engaged in different councils, and in an age where denominations are mattering less and less and less. How do I talk to a small church where those folks feel like, I belong to this particular congregation, but all that other stuff going on, Synod, Presbytery, Louisville, does this still matter? And what kind of, what words can I use, or any of us in this room use, to say, this really does matter. This thing, we're trying to see what God is going to do with it, but it matters to keep asking those questions.
It's a great question. That would take a great term paper. But I think what I would say is one of the things that we bring, which is invaluable, if we take the time to step back, is that we really believe in the covenant community, this covenant that God had modeled throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament, that we belong to one another. Our churches, most of our churches, don't have a clue about our presbyteries or anything else until something goes wrong. So here's the opportunity, right? 70% of those who don't go to church are spiritual people. So use those moments to embody that incarnation. You may believe that, but we are here because we care about what happens to this community of faith. We're not coming in with one answer fits all. We want to hear your story and see how we can come alongside to enhance your story. That's the only thing we can do. When Kevin and I go into these meetings, we literally look at each other, and our last words before we take a deep breath and go through the door is, may we do no more harm. And then we walk out, and if it's a good day, go, oh yeah. But it's that incarnational moment, right? I think you can also say that, the pastors they have gotten have been trained and equipped because they have been loved through congregation and others who have invested in them, who then have served them. So they need to be reminded of that. Those are a couple of thoughts I have. I'm sure there are a zillion more swirling in my brain, but those are values that I think people get, that when things get tough, we're going to come alongside. I think presbyteries, just like Christianity, earn part of our reputations because we were all book of order coming in. I was told when I walked in, you need to close all these churches, blah, 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 blah. I remember saying, Forrest, you'll appreciate this. I didn't travel 3,000 miles to get paid to close churches. You could do that without me. And these are faithful, long-term Presbyterians. That's how they viewed it. Are they costing you anything? No. Leave them alone. Let's see how we can come alongside. Those are the kinds of thoughts I have. We have to break our own reputation by embodying something else. And let them claim what it is, and hopefully you will be able to make it a disclaimer later on because you were there at a time they needed you. There's nothing formulaic about any of this, right? Anything else? I don't know when the next moderator is coming in. All right, so all I'm going to end with is this. Remember who you are. Remember who you are because of whose you are. Remember that we claim to be a people of the impossible. We give lip service to that, and it is hard, and it is scary, and it is unsettling. There are no guarantees. But the truth is, I believe this with all my being. This is what keeps me going in the midst of our challenges. God has a plan that's bigger than us. How can we join God on this journey? How do we not become encumbrances because we said, well, we tried that 20 years ago, it didn't work. Well, that was then, this is now. How do we get out of the way and flow with this river of possibilities? This isn't Pollyanna. Anyone who knows me knows I am not Pollyanna. I am a pragmatist. I am strategic, but I am clearly grounded in this deep hope. that God continues to work through us even in our imperfections, right? And it's, I think it was the president of Fuller, gosh, what was his name? Yeah, Rich Mao, who used to talk about crackpots, that we were cracked pots. But the light shines through those cracks, friends. And that's very powerful. Hang together, call each other, lean on each other, and know that I'm bounded. That light breaks into that tomb. The linens of what had bound Jesus are no longer binding Jesus, right? Unbounded, we thrive, but we got to leave the stuff in the tomb. So God bless you all. Thank you for the time and for having me, really.